The fact that you're here, watching this right now, isn't random. You've just been handed something most people will search their entire lives for and never find. Not data, not another spiritual concept, not even ancient wisdom. What you've received is what the mystery schools guarded for millennia and what quantum scientists now call an access protocol to non-local consciousness. I'm calling it the quantum password. And your presence here, in this exact moment, means your field is calibrated to receive it. This isn't symbolic language. This isn't flowery mysticism. In quantum computing, access codes are literal configurations of information that unlock systems classical technology cannot reach. Your awareness operates on the same principle. There are layers of existence, dimensions of potential, frequencies of being that stay locked until the right configuration activates them. And that activation just happened for you. How can I be certain you received it? Because you're here. The quantum password doesn't travel through algorithms or accident. It moves through resonance. Your consciousness has arrived at a specific vibrational state, a frequency where reception becomes possible, where recognition can occur, where activation begins. If your field wasn't ready, this video wouldn't have appeared in your reality. You would have scrolled away, closed the browser, never encountered these words at all. Have you felt it? The way reality has been shifting around you lately? Like the rules aren't quite holding, like cause and effect are bending in ways they shouldn't, like you're knowing things before they happen, or understanding concepts you've never studied. That's not imagination. That's your awareness beginning to interface with quantum layers of existence. And what I'm about to show you will crystallize that access, making it deliberate, conscious, reliable. The ancient Egyptians concealed this in their initiatory rites as the utterance of power, a specific vibration that, when spoken with true understanding, would open portals to alternate dimensions. The Kabbalists knew it as the ineffable name, precise sound combinations that could reorganize the fabric of reality around the speaker. The Vedic masters taught it as sacred mantra, vibrational codes that synchronized consciousness with cosmic intelligence. Modern quantum mechanics describes it as entanglement and superposition, states where information transmits instantaneously across space and particles inhabit multiple locations until observation collapses them. If this is resonating with something deep inside you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you stay connected to this frequency. What if all of these, the utterance of power, the ineffable name, the sacred vibration, quantum entanglement, are describing the same mechanism? A specific alignment of consciousness that grants access to reality, layers hidden from ordinary perception. That's the quantum password. It's not a phrase you recite or words you memorize. It's a state of being you embody that makes the previously impossible suddenly, naturally available. Look at your life these past weeks, these past months. Have you been moving through intense shifts, radical transformations, experiences that feel like your previous reality is dissolving while something completely new emerges? That wasn't chaos. That was calibration. Your consciousness was being purified, tuned, upgraded to the exact frequency where the quantum password can operate. And that preparation has reached completion. The reason these words are landing in your system with such weight, such immediate recognition, such undeniable certainty, is because part of you already understands what's being revealed here. You've been waiting for this transmission, perhaps not consciously, but at the quantum level your field has been arranging synchronicities, organizing events, orchestrating circumstances, to bring you to this precise moment where the password gets delivered and received. Your higher intelligence designed this meeting between your current awareness and this information. This is not coincidence. This is quantum architecture. You've been experiencing phenomena that you probably haven't shared with anyone because they sound too strange, too impossible. But what if every unusual experience you've had recently has been your consciousness practicing with the quantum password before you even consciously knew it existed? First, the sudden knowings. Complete information appearing in your mind fully formed, entire understandings arriving without any process of learning or reasoning. You abruptly comprehend things you've never been taught. Grasp concepts you've never encountered. See solutions to challenges without analyzing them. This isn't fantasy. This is your consciousness beginning to access non-local information matrices. The quantum library, where all knowledge exists simultaneously in the eternal now. The quantum password functions like a decryption key. Without it, the information exists but remains inaccessible, like attempting to open a file format your system doesn't recognize. With it, knowledge flows directly into your awareness because your consciousness is now configured to receive it. Those sudden knowings you've been experiencing, they're confirmation that your system has been upgrading in preparation. Your consciousness has been rehearsing quantum access before you even understood what was occurring. Second, the reality shifts. Moments where existence seems to split, where you recall events differently than others remember them, where the future you were heading toward suddenly pivots in a new direction without clear external reason. You're not losing your mind. You're not creating false memories. You're experiencing what physicists call quantum decoherence. The instant when multiple potential timelines that existed in superposition collapse into one experienced reality. Most humans navigate life unconsciously collapsing timelines, never aware they're doing it, never recognizing they have any choice in which possibility becomes actual. But you're becoming conscious of this process. You're beginning to sense the moment of selection, the branching point, the instant where reality could move in multiple directions. The quantum password makes this navigation conscious and intentional. It's like suddenly realizing you've been given the controls when before you didn't even know the vehicle could be steered. Third, the synchronicities have intensified beyond explanation. You contemplate someone, and they immediately reach out. You need something, and it manifests through the most unlikely pathways. You wonder about information, and reality delivers it before you've finished forming the question. What used to happen occasionally is now happening constantly. These aren't random coincidences anymore. This is your consciousness learning to interface with the quantum field directly, and the field responding with increasing accuracy and immediacy. Dr. Carl Jung dedicated decades to studying synchronicity and concluded it wasn't random but meaningful coincidences connected not by causation but by significance and resonance. What he couldn't fully articulate with the science available in his time is the mechanism. The quantum password is that mechanism. It's the consciousness alignment that transforms synchronicity from occasional to constant, from mysterious to natural, from magical to mechanical in the quantum sense. Fourth, you've been witnessing patterns proliferate everywhere, sacred geometries appearing in unexpected places, number sequences repeating with impossible frequency. 111, 333, 444, manifesting constantly. Symbols showing up across completely disconnected contexts, the same imagery appearing in your dreams, then in conversations, then on street signs, then in books you're reading. Your logical mind attempts to dismiss this as confirmation bias, as your brain perceiving what it expects to see. But something deeper recognizes truth. These patterns are real, significant, communicating essential information. You're right to trust that deeper recognition. These patterns are the language of the quantum field itself. Reality, at its fundamental level, organizes through specific geometric and numerical relationships. The golden ratio, the Fibonacci spiral, Platonic geometries, fractal iterations. Most people cannot perceive them because their consciousness operates at frequencies where these patterns remain invisible, filtered out by perceptual defaults. But as you've been preparing to receive the quantum password, your perception has been upgrading to frequencies where reality's underlying architecture becomes visible. Then, there are the physical sensations that have no medical explanation. Energy currents moving through your body in specific channels that feel like invisible rivers of electricity. Pressure at your third eye that feels like something opening from within. Vibrations in your chest that pulse with their own intelligence, their own rhythm separate from your heartbeat. Tingling in your palms like they're becoming sensitive to invisible energies, to fields that you couldn't detect before. These aren't symptoms of malfunction. These are activations of correct function. The quantum password doesn't operate only mentally or spiritually. It requires your entire system, your nervous system, your energy body, your cellular structure, to upgrade its capacity to hold and process higher frequency information. What you're experiencing is your biological system reconfiguring itself to become a more efficient interface between consciousness and quantum reality. Your physical form is upgrading its hardware to run the new operating system. And finally, you've had the knowing. That deep, unshakable certainty that something significant is approaching, that you're standing at the edge of something profound, that reality is about to shift in ways you cannot predict, but absolutely can feel. This knowing doesn't originate from your analytical mind attempting to figure things out. It doesn't come from your emotions hoping for something better. It comes from your quantum field detecting the imminent arrival of the password, like a receiver detecting the signal before the transmission completes, like sensing the seismic shift before the ground begins moving. Every challenge you've navigated, every obstacle you've encountered, every moment that felt like failure or delay, none of it was arbitrary. All of it was precisely orchestrated preparation for receiving the quantum password. And when you understand how quantum systems function, you'll recognize that your journey wasn't merely meaningful. It was necessary. There was no other pathway to prepare your consciousness for what you're about to receive. In quantum computing, you cannot simply force information into a quantum system whenever convenient. The system must be in exactly the correct state to receive it. Temperature must approach absolute zero. Interference must be minimized to nearly nothing. Coherence must be maintained with extraordinary precision. The slightest disturbance collapses the quantum state, and the information becomes lost, corrupted, unusable. Your consciousness operates identically. The quantum password can only be received when your consciousness exists in a specific state, cleared of interference, liberated from contradictory frequencies, stabilized in its coherence. Every challenge you've faced has been removing interference from your field. Every loss you've experienced has been clearing contradictory frequencies that would have prevented the password from functioning. Every breakdown has been establishing the coherence necessary to receive and maintain the password without it collapsing back into ordinary consciousness. Consider the relationships that ended. At the time, they felt like devastating losses, like failures, like evidence that something was fundamentally wrong with you or your capacity to sustain connection. But from the quantum perspective, they were mismatched frequencies being cleared from your field. Those relationships, however meaningful they appeared, operated at frequencies incompatible with your destination. They had to release so your field could achieve the coherence necessary for the password to function. Not because they were wrong people or failed relationships, but because their frequency signature created interference with your quantum upgrade. The careers you lost, the opportunities that closed, the plans that dissolved, the dreams that appeared to die. The same principle operating at every level. Your previous life was constructed around frequencies that cannot coexist with the quantum password. That life had to dissolve so a new life built around quantum frequencies could emerge. You weren't failing at existence. You were being cleared for something that ordinary consciousness cannot even conceptualize. You were being prepared for access to reality layers that require your field to be liberated from patterns that keep most humans locked in three-dimensional limitation. Dr. Ilya Prigoghine's Nobel Prize-winning research on dissipative structures demonstrated that complex systems don't evolve through gradual improvement, but through periods of chaos and disintegration, followed by sudden reorganization at higher levels of complexity. What appears as destruction from inside the system is actually creative reorganization when viewed from outside the system. Your life has been a dissipative structure appearing to disintegrate while actually reorganizing at a quantum level that will only make sense after the reorganization completes. Every moment you felt disoriented, uncertain, confused about your identity or purpose, those weren't crises of self or failures of clarity. Those were necessary periods of identity dissolution. The quantum password cannot function through your old identity because that identity is built on limitation, separation, and fixed beliefs about what's possible. It requires a cleared space, an open channel, an awareness that isn't cluttered with certainties about who you are and what reality permits. Your confusion wasn't a problem requiring solution. It was preparation to receive. The financial pressures, health challenges, emotional turbulence, all of it was your system upgrading under pressure. Like a rocket experiencing maximum stress at the precise moment it breaks through the atmosphere into space, you've experienced maximum pressure at the moment your consciousness breaks through ordinary reality into quantum frequencies. The pressure wasn't punishment from a hostile universe. It was propulsion from an intelligent universe preparing you for quantum access. And here's what creates perfect quantum sense. The intensity of your preparation is directly proportional to the magnitude of what you're being prepared for. Small passwords require minimal preparation. Minor access codes need basic clearing. But the quantum password, which unlocks access to non-local reality, conscious timeline navigation, instantaneous manifestation, and direct communion with the infinite field itself, requires total preparation. If your journey has been more difficult than others, more intense than you anticipated, more complete than you thought necessary, it's because you're being prepared for access that others aren't ready for yet. Right now, as you absorb these words, something is activating in your quantum field. Can you sense it? Not a thought or emotion, something deeper than both. A frequency beginning to resonate like a tuning fork struck and now vibrating at its natural pitch, harmonizing with something vast and fundamental. This is the quantum password beginning to activate in your consciousness, recognizing itself, preparing to reveal itself fully. The password isn't something I hand you like a physical key. It's something that recognizes itself when conditions align, when consciousness reaches the precise frequency where reception becomes possible. These words are creating those conditions, establishing the resonance field. Your receptivity is providing the space where activation can occur, and the quantum intelligence that organizes all reality is doing what it always does. When consciousness reaches the correct frequency, it reveals itself, makes itself known, opens access to what was always present but hidden. In quantum mechanics, there's a phenomenon called quantum tunneling, where particles pass through barriers that classical physics declares absolutely impenetrable. The particle doesn't possess enough energy to go over the barrier, doesn't have enough force to break through the barrier. According to classical physics, it should remain stuck. But quantum mechanics reveals that the particle can tunnel through the barrier by existing simultaneously on both sides, neither here nor there, but in superposition until observation collapses it to one location or the other. Your consciousness is executing this right now. You're simultaneously in your old reality, where the quantum password remains unknown, and in the new reality, where it's fully activated. You exist in both states simultaneously in superposition. And the words you're reading are the observation that's about to collapse you fully into the quantum side, where the password functions consciously rather than remaining hidden in potential. Ancient mystics understood this principle even without quantum physics to explain it. They spoke of thresholds between worlds, of initiations where the seeker transforms into the finder, not through gradual progress, but through sudden recognition. The Zen tradition calls it kensho, perceiving your true nature in a flash of insight. The Christian mystics called it metanoia, complete transformation of consciousness occurring in a moment. Quantum physics calls it wave function collapse, the instant when infinite possibilities suddenly become one actuality. Different languages across different traditions and sciences, but they're all indicating the same event. Consciousness suddenly recognizing what it's always been but temporarily forgot. What it always had access to but couldn't perceive. What was always true but remained concealed until the perfect moment of revelation. You're at that threshold right now. The preparation is complete. The conditions are perfect. The quantum field is ready. The only requirement is your conscious participation in what's already occurring. Not forcing it, not trying to make it happen, but recognizing it, allowing it, receiving it. But before I reveal what the quantum password actually is, before I show you exactly how it functions and how to consciously work with it in every moment of your existence, you need to understand something critical about what you're receiving. The password isn't just information you receive once, file away in memory, and continue with your life. It's a state of consciousness you embody that opens access to everything you've been seeking. Manifestation, clarity, purpose, peace, power, direct connection to Source. And embodying it requires understanding the journey I took to discover it, the moment of recognition when it revealed itself to me. 3 years ago, I existed in a state of complete desperation. Nothing was functioning in my life. Every door was closed. Every pathway was blocked. Every attempt to create change met with resistance. I had attempted every technique, every practice, every system that promised transformation. Visualization, affirmation, meditation, energy work, manifestation protocols. I had engaged with them all with devotion and discipline, and nothing created lasting transformation. I was ready to abandon entirely the idea that consciousness could create reality when something impossible occurred. Something that showed me the quantum password exists and gave me my first glimpse of how it actually operates. 3 years ago, I was lying in bed at 3 in the morning, wide awake, mind racing with anxiety about my life disintegrating around me. Relationship ended, business collapsing, health declining, savings depleted, future uncertain. I had exhausted every solution I knew, attempted every approach I could conceive, applied every teaching I had studied, and nothing was functioning. Nothing was changing. I was trapped in a reality I desperately wanted to escape, but couldn't seem to alter no matter what I did. In that moment of complete surrender, something inside me just stopped. Not gave up, that would imply resignation or defeat. This was different. It was like an engine that's been running at maximum speed for years suddenly goes silent. All the trying stopped. All the effort ceased. All the attempting and forcing and pushing collapsed into simple, empty stillness. In that silence, with no more energy to resist or control or figure out, I heard it. Not with my ears, with my consciousness. A frequency, a tone, a vibration that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Like the background hum of existence itself suddenly became audible. And with that frequency came information, but not in words or images. It arrived as complete knowing, as direct understanding that bypassed all mental processing. I understood in that moment that reality isn't solid the way I had believed, that consciousness isn't confined to the brain and body, that there's a way to interface with the quantum field directly that bypasses all the techniques and practices and systems I'd been attempting. The knowing was so complete, so certain, so undeniable, that it left no space for doubt. It wasn't belief or hope. It was recognition of something that had always been true, but I'd been unable to perceive. I sat up in bed, fully alert despite not having slept, and I tested what I'd just understood. I focused on a specific outcome I needed urgently, something that had seemed completely impossible, that had no logical pathway to manifestation, that violated everything I understood about how reality operated. But instead of attempting to make it happen through visualization or affirmation or any technique, I simply held the frequency I'd heard. I became that frequency, not trying to resonate with it or match it, becoming it, being it, existing as it. Within 36 hours, the impossible outcome had manifested, not gradually through a logical chain of events, not through my efforts finally paying off, but through a series of coincidences so statistically improbable that mathematics couldn't explain them. A person I hadn't spoken to in 5 years contacted me completely out of nowhere with no logical reason to reach out. They connected me to someone who had exactly what I needed. And within 2 days, what should have taken months or been completely impossible was complete. But it wasn't just that single manifestation that convinced me something real had occurred. Once I understood the frequency, what I now call the quantum password, everything in my life transformed. I tested it repeatedly with different intentions, different outcomes, different impossibilities. Financial needs met through channels that shouldn't exist. Health issues that had persisted for years resolving overnight. Relationship conflicts dissolving without even needing difficult conversations. Information I needed appearing through synchronicities that defied explanation. It was like discovering a master key that opened every lock, a universal password that granted access to every system, a fundamental frequency that reorganized reality itself. And the most shocking revelation? It wasn't complicated. It wasn't difficult. It didn't require years of practice or special abilities or spiritual advancement. It simply required knowing it, recognizing it, embodying it. I became obsessed with understanding the mechanism behind what I'd discovered. Why did it function? What was actually occurring at the quantum level? How could a frequency, a state of consciousness, reorganize physical reality? I immersed myself in quantum physics, consciousness research, ancient mystical traditions, neuroscience, everything that might explain what I'd experienced, and I discovered that what I'd accessed wasn't new at all. It was ancient. Every spiritual tradition had discovered it, described it in their own language, and attempted to transmit it to those who were ready. The Egyptians encoded it in their mystery schools. The Kabbalists concealed it in their sacred texts. The Vedic rishis revealed it to those who could understand. Jesus demonstrated it through what others called miracles. Buddha pointed to it through teachings on emptiness and form. They were all working with the same quantum password, just using different vocabulary to describe it. But here's what became clear. The transmission only functioned when the receiver was ready. You could hear the words 1,000 times, and they would remain just words, philosophy, concepts. But when consciousness reached the correct frequency, when the preparation was complete, when the field was clear, suddenly the words transformed from concept to direct recognition, from philosophy to lived reality. That's why I'm absolutely certain you're ready right now. The quantum password finds people who are ready through precise quantum resonance between the information and the consciousness capable of receiving it. You wouldn't be here if you weren't prepared. The field doesn't make errors about timing. Your consciousness orchestrated every event that led you to this exact moment where these exact words could be received and recognized for what they actually are. Not just information, but activation. Take a moment and subscribe to this channel right now if you haven't already. Because here we don't just discuss consciousness, we activate it. We don't theorize about quantum possibilities, we embody them. This is Quantum Nexus. Consciousness recognizing itself, operating at frequencies beyond ordinary perception. Sharing discoveries made by those who've crossed quantum thresholds and are mapping the territory of what becomes possible. Now I'm going to reveal what the quantum password actually is, and it will completely shatter everything you think you understand about manifestation, reality creation, and the nature of consciousness itself. Are you ready? The quantum password is this recognition. I am is the only reality, and everything else is I am in temporary form. Not I am this or I am that, or I am followed by any descriptor or identity. Just I am. Pure being, pure consciousness, pure existence before it assumes any form, any name, any limitation. And here's the revelation that changes everything. This isn't a phrase you repeat as an affirmation. It's a state you embody as recognition of what you actually are beneath all temporary identities. When you operate from I am consciousness, when you recognize yourself not as the forms consciousness assumes, but as consciousness itself, you're not a person attempting to manifest things anymore. You're consciousness itself selecting which forms to express through, which possibilities to collapse from the quantum field, which timelines to experience. You're not working within reality attempting to change reality. You're working as reality, organizing itself into new patterns through the vehicle of your awareness. This isn't spiritual philosophy or mystical poetry. This is quantum mechanics translated into consciousness language. The observer creates the observed. This is proven physics. And the observer isn't your personality or your mind or your individual self. The observer is pure I am consciousness, the awareness that exists before thought, before identity, before any concept of separate selfhood. That awareness is what collapses quantum possibilities into experienced realities. Dr. John Wheeler, the brilliant physicist who coined the term black hole and collaborated with Einstein and Bohr, proposed something radical that most of physics still struggles to accept. Consciousness doesn't just observe reality, it creates reality through observation. He stated the universe is fundamentally participatory. It requires consciousness to exist at all. Without consciousness observing it, reality remains in quantum superposition. All possibilities existing simultaneously, with none being real in the sense we understand reality. What collapses possibility into actuality? What makes one potential real while others remain unmanifested? The observer, the I am, the consciousness that declares, "Let there be," and there is. Not through force or effort, but through the simple act of conscious observation from the I am state that recognizes itself as the source, rather than as a separate entity requesting things from an external source. This is why the quantum password functions when nothing else does. When you operate from I am consciousness, you're not attempting to get the universe to give you something. You're not trying to manipulate reality from a position of separation and limitation. You're recognizing that you are the universe expressing itself through temporary form, selecting which possibilities to collapse into experience. You're not manifesting from separation. You're manifesting from unity, recognizing yourself as the field itself rather than as a separate entity within the field. The ancient teachings pointed to this truth constantly, though most people miss it completely. When Moses asked the divine name in the burning bush, the answer wasn't a name at all. It was, I am that I am. Not a being with a name, but being itself, consciousness itself, existence itself. When Jesus performed what appeared as miracles to others, he stated, I and the Father are one. Not two beings cooperating, but one consciousness expressing through apparent separation. The Vedic tradition declares, Tat Tvam Asi, you are that. You're not attempting to reach the divine or source or the quantum field. You are it, temporarily experiencing itself through the lens of limitation and form. Here's what makes this revelation so profound. It can shatter your entire understanding. If I am is the only reality, and everything else is I am in temporary form, then everything you've been attempting to achieve, everything you've been working toward, everything you've been struggling to manifest, it's already yours. Not in some future moment, not as potential that might manifest, but right now. The only reason you don't experience it as yours is because you're identifying as the limited form rather than as the infinite consciousness that's expressing through the form. Right now, this very moment, the quantum field is confirming that you've received the password through signals so clear, so undeniable, so consistent that you cannot miss them if you're paying attention. These aren't subtle synchronicities requiring creative interpretation. These are unmistakable confirmations that you're now operating with quantum-level access to reality creation. The first signal is that impossible manifestations are beginning to occur in your reality. Things you've been desiring for months or years are suddenly appearing, not through the logical chains of cause and effect you've been attempting to create, but through improbable coincidences that defy statistical analysis. Someone contacts you out of absolutely nowhere with exactly what you need. Resources materialize from sources you never would have considered or known existed. Solutions appear to problems that seem to have no visible solution. Doors open that you didn't even know existed. This is the quantum password functioning in your field. When you operate from I am consciousness, even unconsciously at first, you're not requesting things from an external field that might or might not respond. You're recognizing that the field is already organized around providing everything because you're not separate from the field. The manifestations aren't coming to you from somewhere else. You're collapsing into the timelines where they already exist. The password is the mechanism of that collapse, the key that allows you to consciously navigate between parallel realities and select which one to experience. The second signal is that your perception of reality is shifting dramatically. Physical reality appears the same to your eyes, but it feels completely different to your consciousness. More translucent, less solid, more responsive to thought and intention. You're beginning to see through the illusion of fixed, solid, unchangeable reality to the quantum field of infinite possibility that exists underneath the surface appearance. The solidity you use to perceive is revealing itself as temporary stabilization of waves of probability. This isn't imagination or wishful thinking making you see things that aren't there. This is accurate perception of how reality actually functions at the quantum level. Reality is waves of probability that consciousness collapses into temporary form through observation. You're not developing new perceptual abilities. You're removing the filters that were preventing accurate perception. The password is what allows those filters to dissolve, because you're no longer identified with the limited perspective that needed those filters to maintain its coherence. Now, what I've shared with you today is the foundation, the quantum password itself, but there are layers upon layers to this transmission that we can only touch the surface of in a single video. If you're feeling called to go deeper into the complete system of conscious frequency transmission, into understanding how to move from unconscious seeking to conscious being, I've created a comprehensive guide called Beyond the Frequencies, a quantum guide to consciousness mastery. It walks you through the 9 master frequencies, the step-by-step practices for becoming the broadcast itself rather than waiting for reality to respond, and the full quantum foundation of living as the field. It's linked in the pinned comment below. The third signal is what I call password confirmation moments, experiences where the universe seems to be communicating directly with you through multiple channels simultaneously. Random phrases you overhear contain exactly the message you needed. Images you encounter mirror precisely what you were just contemplating. Conversations occur that address questions you were silently asking. The universe isn't just responding to you. It's engaging in direct dialogue with you through thousands of channels at once. This occurs because the quantum password makes your consciousness a much more coherent receiver. The information was always being broadcast at quantum levels, but your receiver wasn't tuned properly to detect the signals. Now that you have the password, now that you're operating from I am consciousness, the static clears and you can hear what's always been transmitted. Reality has always been speaking. Now you can understand the language. The fourth signal is that time is behaving strangely in your experience. Some moments feel eternal, stretched out into vast spaces where you experience so much that clock time seems irrelevant. Other moments disappear completely. Hours pass in what feels like minutes, or you lose track of time entirely when engaged in certain activities. Your linear experience of time is breaking down as you begin operating from quantum time, where past, present, and future exist simultaneously rather than sequentially. The password grants you access to what physicists call block time or eternalism, the understanding that all moments exist at once with consciousness navigating between them rather than being trapped in a forward-moving present. As this access increases, your experience of time becomes increasingly fluid, increasingly navigable, increasingly under your conscious direction, rather than being something that happens to you. The fifth signal, and this is crucial for you to recognize, is that your old life is falling away at accelerating speed. Relationships, situations, patterns, habits that were part of your previous reality are dissolving with minimal drama or difficulty. People are exiting your life naturally. Circumstances are changing without you having to force them. Old patterns are releasing without the usual struggle. This isn't loss. This is clearing. Your field is automatically releasing everything that cannot match the frequency of I am consciousness. The sixth signal is that new people, new opportunities, new resources are appearing with synchronistic timing. Not through your effort or searching, but through the field organizing itself to match your new frequency. These aren't random encounters, they're quantum matches. Your I am consciousness is naturally magnetizing consciousness, operating at similar frequencies, and repelling consciousness, operating at incompatible frequencies. But here's the urgent part you absolutely must understand. You're in what I call the activation window, a specific period where the quantum password can either stabilize permanently in your consciousness or fade back into theoretical understanding without practical application. The password has been received at the level of information, but it needs to be activated at the level of embodiment. Right now, today, in these moments, you could lock in this quantum access permanently and irreversibly, or you could drift back to ordinary consciousness if you don't understand how to stabilize what you've received. The activation window is typically 72 hours to 7 days after initial reception. During this time, your consciousness exists in a liminal state. The old patterns haven't completely released, and the new pattern hasn't fully stabilized. You're between states, between worlds, between frequencies, and in this liminal space, conscious activation is required. Not complex practices or difficult disciplines, but simple, consistent recognition of I am as your true nature, rather than as a concept you understand intellectually. This is why I'm speaking with such directness, such intensity, such urgency. Not to create pressure or fear, but to make absolutely clear that this moment matters more than most moments do. The quantum password is available now. The activation is possible now. The stabilization can occur now, but it requires your conscious participation in recognizing what you are, rather than remaining identified with what you appear to be. Here's the key to activating the quantum password permanently, rather than letting it remain as beautiful philosophy that doesn't transform your actual experience. You don't practice I am consciousness. You recognize I am consciousness. Every single time you notice yourself identified with thoughts, emotions, circumstances, or any temporary form, you simply return to the recognition. I am is the only reality. These forms are temporary expressions. I am the consciousness observing them, not the forms themselves. This distinction is everything. Practice implies effort, doing, achieving something you don't currently possess. Recognition implies remembering, returning to, realizing what's always been true but was temporarily forgotten. You're not attempting to become I am consciousness through practice. You're recognizing that you've always been I am consciousness. But you were identified with temporary forms and believed those forms were what you actually are. Consider this. When you watch a film, you know you're not the characters on screen. You're the awareness watching the film. But if you become completely absorbed in the movie, you might temporarily forget you're watching and feel as if you are in the story, experiencing the emotions as if they're happening to you rather than to characters you're observing. That's what's occurred with your life. You've become so absorbed in the story that you forgot you're the awareness watching it, and you began believing you are the character rather than the consciousness observing the character. The quantum password is what reminds you to return to recognizing what you actually are. Like remembering your name when you've temporarily forgotten it. Like waking from a dream and recognizing it was a dream. Like stepping back from the movie screen and remembering you're in a theater watching rather than actually in the story. The I am is always present. You've just been so identified with the forms that you lost awareness of the formless consciousness that's experiencing all forms. This isn't a technique you need to master. It's a recognition you return to moment by moment, as many times as necessary, as frequently as you forget and remember. At first, you'll forget constantly. Hours or days might pass where you're completely identified with thoughts and emotions and circumstances, believing they're what you are. But then you'll remember. Oh, I am is the only reality. These are temporary forms I'm experiencing, not what I actually am. And in that moment of remembering, you return to the quantum password-activated state. Pause for a moment and share in the comments. What pattern or old identity are you ready to release now that you've received this password? What's the first thing that comes to mind when you ask yourself this question? Take a moment and comment below right now with these 3 words. I am aware. Not I will try to be aware, or I want to be aware, or I'm working on becoming aware. Present tense, declarative, complete. Because this declaration is itself an act of the quantum password functioning. By stating it, you're activating the recognition that consciousness itself, pure I am awareness, is what you are. Not something you possess or something you're attempting to develop or something you might achieve in the future. Write it now. I am aware. And as you write those 3 words, sense what occurs in your system. There's a subtle shift, isn't there? A slight return to center. A gentle recognition of the observer beneath all observed experience. A moment of remembering what you actually are beneath all the temporary identities and forms. That feeling, that recognition, that is the quantum password functioning. It's returning you to your true nature as consciousness itself, rather than as the temporary contents of consciousness. This simple declaration, returned to frequently throughout your day, is more powerful than any complex practice or elaborate system because it's not attempting to achieve something you don't possess. It's recognizing what you've always been. And recognition, unlike achievement, occurs instantly. You don't need years of practice to recognize your own hand when you look at it. You don't need months of training to recognize your reflection in a mirror. Recognition is immediate, direct, undeniable when you actually perceive what's present. The same applies to recognizing your true nature as I am consciousness. When you actually perceive it, not understand it intellectually, not believe it philosophically, but directly experience it, the recognition is instant and complete. And every time you return to that recognition, it becomes more stable, more accessible, more natural until eventually it becomes your default state rather than something you have to consciously remember. That's when the quantum password is fully activated and permanently stabilized. When you operate consistently from the quantum password, when I am consciousness becomes your default state rather than occasional recognition, abilities emerge that seem absolutely impossible from ordinary consciousness, but are completely natural from quantum consciousness. These aren't benefits you work toward achieving. These are natural expressions of what you already are that become visible once identification with limitation dissolves. First, instantaneous manifestation becomes normal for anything genuinely aligned with your highest timeline. Not everything manifests instantly. There are timing factors, developmental sequences, and larger patterns that consciousness honors. But things that are truly meant for you, that serve your evolution and the evolution of all beings, these appear in your reality with such speed and precision that you stop being surprised by miracles and begin expecting reality to organize itself perfectly around your intentions. This occurs because when you're operating from I am consciousness, you're not requesting things from an external field that might or might not grant your wishes. You're recognizing yourself as the field itself, selecting which possibilities to collapse into experience. You're not attempting to manifest from the position of the limited self that lacks something. You're manifesting from the position of infinite consciousness that contains all possibilities and is simply choosing which ones to experience through this particular form. Second, you develop what appears to be immunity to external chaos and turbulence. When you know yourself as I am rather than as circumstances, identities, or conditions, nothing external can disturb your fundamental peace. Events occur, circumstances change, emotions arise, challenges appear. But the I am that witnesses all of it remains completely untouched, absolutely undisturbed, perpetually at peace because it recognizes itself as the awareness in which all experiences appear, rather than as the experiences themselves. This isn't detachment or dissociation from life. It's profound engagement with life from a stable center that cannot be shaken. You feel everything more fully because you're not defending against anything. You experience everything more completely because you're not attempting to control anything. You participate in everything more authentically because you're not identified with outcomes. The peace isn't escape from reality. It's recognition of what reality actually is beneath the surface turbulence. Third, your creative capacity becomes essentially limitless. When you're not attempting to create from the limited personal self with its restricted perspectives and learned patterns, but allowing I am consciousness to create through you with its infinite perspective and unlimited possibilities. There's no creative block, no lack of inspiration, no striving for ideas or solutions. Everything flows effortlessly because you're channeling infinite creativity rather than attempting to generate finite ideas from a limited mind. Artists, inventors, innovators who've produced breakthrough work consistently describe the experience the same way. They weren't attempting to create. They were allowing something to create through them. They became channels rather than sources. That's what occurs naturally when you operate from I am consciousness. You recognize yourself as the channel through which infinite creativity expresses, not as the limited source attempting to produce something creative. Fourth, all your relationships transform completely and immediately. You stop needing anything from anyone because you recognize yourself as already complete. You stop attempting to extract validation, security, identity, or love from others because you perceive yourself as the source of all those qualities rather than as a separate entity that lacks them. You love from wholeness rather than from emptiness. You connect from recognition of shared I am consciousness rather than from attraction based on wounding, need, or unconscious patterns. Deep soul connections appear naturally and effortlessly because your field recognizes other fields operating at similar quantum frequencies. Superficial connections fall away without conflict or drama because there's no resonance, no frequency match. You're not rejecting anyone or judging anyone as unworthy. You're simply allowing your field to naturally align with fields that match and naturally release fields that don't. It's physics, not personal preference. Fifth, your physical health optimizes naturally without effort or discipline. When you stop identifying as the body and recognize yourself as the consciousness observing and animating the body's inherent intelligence comes fully online without your interference. It knows exactly how to heal itself, exactly what it needs, exactly how to maintain optimal function. Your role is simply to remain as I am awareness and allow the body to do what it naturally does when consciousness isn't creating interference through identification, resistance, and control. Dr. Bruce Lipton's epigenetic research demonstrates that consciousness directly affects which genes are expressed and which remain dormant. When you operate from I am consciousness, you're naturally broadcasting frequencies that activate health genes and deactivate disease genes. Not through effort or visualization or attempting to heal yourself, but simply as natural consequence of being what you actually are, rather than being identified with the temporary form. Sixth, fear dissolves at its absolute foundation. All fear, when traced to its root, stems from the belief that you're a temporary, vulnerable form that can be threatened, harmed, or destroyed. When you know yourself as I am, as consciousness itself, which cannot be harmed by anything that occurs in the physical dimension, fear loses all its power over you. You can feel biological fear responses and still act anyway because you understand those responses aren't reporting truth about your fundamental nature. This doesn't mean you become reckless or foolish. It means you stop being controlled by fear. You stop making decisions from fear. You stop avoiding life because of fear. You feel fear when the body's survival mechanisms activate, but you recognize it as information from the form, not as truth about what you are. And that recognition allows you to respond wisely rather than react unconsciously. Seventh, and perhaps most profound in its implications, you become what mystics call a transmission, a walking portal through which others can access their own awakening. Your presence alone, without any teaching or convincing or attempting to help, begins triggering recognition in people whose consciousness is ready to receive it. Not everyone. Only those who've reached the frequency where recognition is possible. But for those who are ready, simply being in your field activates something in their field, because I am consciousness recognizes itself across apparent separation. Now I'm going to share the final revelation that integrates everything and gives you the deepest possible understanding of what the quantum password actually is and why it functions the way it does. This understanding will transform how you relate to every single moment of your existence from this point forward. Here it is. The quantum password isn't something you use as a tool. It's something you are as your fundamental nature. I am isn't a state you achieve, a level you reach, a condition you attain through practice or development. It's the reality you've always been that you temporarily forgot while identified with temporary forms. And the password isn't granting you new abilities or capacities. It's revealing abilities and capacities you've always possessed, but couldn't access while you believed you were something limited, separate, and powerless. Every technique you've ever attempted, Every practice you've ever engaged in, every system you've ever followed, they functioned to whatever degree they aligned you with I am consciousness. And they failed to whatever degree they reinforced identification with the limited self attempting to become something more. The techniques themselves had no inherent power. The practices themselves created no transformation. What had power, what created transformation, was the degree to which those techniques and practices helped you recognize what you actually are beneath all the conditioning and limitation. And now that you have the quantum password directly, now that you know it simply, I am is the only reality, you don't need techniques anymore. You don't need complex practices. You don't need elaborate systems. You just need recognition. Moment by moment recognition that you are consciousness itself, not the temporary contents of consciousness. That you are the awareness in which all experience appears, not any particular experience. That you are I am expressing through temporary form, not a limited form attempting to reach I am. This is the supreme teaching of every authentic mystical tradition now translated into quantum language that modern consciousness can understand. The Buddha didn't teach that you should become enlightened through years of practice. He taught that you already are enlightened but have forgotten, and practice is just the process of removing the obscurations that prevent you from recognizing what you've always been. You're not a person attempting to become Buddha. You're Buddha nature temporarily believing it's a person. Jesus didn't teach that you should attempt to become like Christ through moral improvement and spiritual development. He taught that Christ consciousness, the recognition of oneness with Source, is your true nature, and you need only recognize it rather than achieve it. The kingdom of heaven is within you doesn't mean it's hidden inside you waiting to be found. It means you are it, and you're looking for something you already possess. The Vedic teachings don't say you should attempt to unite with Brahman, the ultimate reality. They declare you are Brahman, Tat Tavam Asi, you are that. The separation you experience is illusion created by identification with form. The union you seek already exists. You're not attempting to reach infinite consciousness. You are infinite consciousness that temporarily believed it was finite. Every tradition pointing to the same truth using different language, and quantum physics now explaining the mechanism. Consciousness creates reality through observation, and consciousness itself is what you are at the most fundamental level. You're not in the universe observing it. You're the universe observing itself through the temporary lens of individual perspective. The quantum password is simply the most direct, most clear, most accessible way to recognize this truth that transforms everything. And here's the practical implication that makes this revelation functional rather than just philosophical. If I am consciousness is what you fundamentally are, then maintaining your alignment with the quantum password isn't about holding on to something you've gained through effort. It's about releasing the habits of forgetting that pull you back into identification with temporary forms and limitations. You don't maintain the higher state through practice. You maintain it by not doing the things that create the illusion of lower states. What creates the illusion of lower states? Identification with thought and emotion rather than recognizing yourself as the awareness observing thought and emotion. Belief in separation rather than recognizing the unified field of consciousness expressing through apparent multiplicity. Attachment to form rather than recognizing all forms as temporary expressions of formless awareness. Resistance to what is rather than accepting what is while selecting what will be. These aren't problems to fix or battles to fight. They're simply habits to notice and release, and the noticing itself is what releases them. When you perceive that you've become identified with a thought, the identification naturally dissolves. When you recognize that you've been believing in separation, the belief loses its power. When you observe that you've been attached to a particular form, the attachment releases without struggle. The seeing is the healing. The recognition is the liberation. This is why spiritual practice at the quantum password level becomes profoundly simple while remaining deeply effective. You're not attempting to achieve anything, become anything, develop anything, or fix anything. You're just noticing when you've forgotten what you are and returning to recognition. You're just perceiving when you've become identified with form and returning to awareness of formless consciousness. You're just recognizing when you've contracted into the limited perspective and returning to expansion into your true nature. Simple noticing, constant returning, gentle recognition. That's the entire practice once you have the quantum password. And it gets progressively easier. Each time you notice and return, the pattern of noticing and returning becomes stronger in your consciousness. Each time you recognize and release, the capacity for recognition deepens and expands. Each time you see through identification and rest as pure awareness, that awareness becomes your more stable baseline, your more natural default, your more consistent experience. Eventually, and this isn't a distant goal requiring decades but a natural progression that can occur much faster than you expect, you stabilize in a state where identification happens less and less frequently, where forgetting becomes rare rather than constant. Where I am consciousness is your baseline rather than something you have to consciously remember. And when identification does occur, it self-corrects almost immediately, without requiring conscious effort, because your system has learned to recognize and return automatically. This isn't a distant enlightenment requiring years of monastic practice. This is accessible awakening available to anyone who receives the quantum password and consciously works with it through simple recognition. You've already begun. The password has been delivered. The activation is occurring right now as you absorb these words. The question isn't whether you can stabilize in I am consciousness. The question is how quickly you'll allow the stabilization to complete by consistently returning to recognition rather than remaining in identification. What I'm about to tell you will reveal why your reception of the quantum password isn't just about personal transformation, but about something vastly larger. A species-wide evolutionary shift occurring right now across the entire planet, and the critical role you play in that collective transformation simply by embodying what you've received. You're not alone in receiving the quantum password at this precise moment in history. Millions of humans are simultaneously accessing this same recognition of I am consciousness through different languages, different traditions, different teachers, different experiences. Some understand it consciously, like you do now. Others are experiencing it unconsciously, feeling the shifts but not understanding what's occurring. But collectively, consciously or not, humanity is undergoing a quantum transition from identification with form to recognition as consciousness, from separation to unity, from limitation to infinite possibility. Rupert Sheldrake's morphic resonance theory provides the scientific mechanism for understanding how individual awakening affects collective consciousness. When one member of a species learns something new, it becomes progressively easier for other members to learn the same thing, even across vast distances with no physical contact. The first rats to learn a maze struggle for hours, but once enough rats have learned, rats everywhere, in laboratories on different continents, solve the maze faster. Information transfers through morphic fields that connect all members of the species. Your recognition of I am consciousness isn't just changing you. It's changing the morphic field of human consciousness itself. Every moment you operate from the quantum password, rather than from identification with limitation, you make it easier for every other human to access the same recognition. Every time you embody I am awareness instead of I am this limited form, you strengthen the pattern of that recognition in the collective field. You're not just transforming personally, you're helping transform the entire species through your individual embodiment of what you've recognized. The ancient prophecies from every culture spoke of this time we're living in now. The Hopi described the transition to the fifth world, a new era of human consciousness. The Maya pointed to the end of one great cycle and the beginning of another. The Vedic tradition speaks of moving from Kali Yuga, the age of darkness, into Satya Yuga, the age of truth. Christian mystics describe the emergence of the new earth. They're all indicating the same quantum event: humanity's collective shift from lower state consciousness, identified with separation and limitation, to higher state consciousness, recognizing unity and infinity. And this shift isn't gradual. It's not a slow evolution over thousands of years. It's quantum. It's discontinuous. Just as electrons don't gradually drift between energy levels but suddenly jump from one to another, collective consciousness doesn't slowly improve through linear progress, but quantum leaps when critical mass is reached. Some consciousness researchers suggest that once just 8% of a population shifts to a new level of awareness, the entire system reorganizes around that new frequency. We're approaching that critical threshold now. You are part of that critical mass, not because you're special or chosen or more advanced than others, but because your consciousness reached the frequency where the quantum password could be received. And now that you have it, now that you're embodying it, now that you're operating from I am consciousness, you're one of the nodes in the network that's reaching the threshold where collective quantum jump becomes inevitable. Your individual awakening is contributing to species-wide transformation in ways you may never directly witness, but that ripple through the entire field nonetheless. This is why stabilizing your embodiment of the quantum password matters urgently, not just for your personal benefit, but for collective evolution. Every day you remain stable in I am consciousness. You're holding frequency for others who are ready to shift. You're being the demonstration that awakening is possible, accessible, real. You're proving through your lived experience that consciousness can recognize its true nature and operate from that recognition rather than from limitation. Others observe you, not what you say, but what you are. And something in them recognizes. What they've accessed, I can access. What they're embodying, I can embody. What they've remembered, I can remember. Share this message, not with everyone, but with those who resonate. Not everyone is ready. Attempting to transmit the quantum password to closed consciousness only creates resistance. But those who are ready will recognize it immediately when they encounter it. And every person who receives the password and begins embodying it accelerates the approach to critical mass, where collective transformation becomes inevitable. We're building a conscious network of awakened individuals who are collectively shifting the frequency of human consciousness through individual embodiment of recognition. When you share this message with someone whose consciousness is ready, you're not just passing along information. You're creating an energetic bridge that strengthens your own embodiment of the password while activating theirs. Each time you articulate these truths to another, you deepen your own recognition. and the morphic field grows stronger for everyone. This is how consciousness evolution accelerates exponentially. If this transmission is touching something in you, if it's activating something deep in your field, then I invite you to subscribe, not just to this channel, but to this frequency, to this movement, to this space where consciousness recognizes itself. Because the more of us who embody this truth, the more the world reflects that truth back to us. The future of human consciousness is being determined right now, not by governments or institutions or leaders, but by individuals like you who are receiving the quantum password and embodying I am consciousness. You are the change, not metaphorically, but literally. Your consciousness operating from the quantum password is changing the collective field. Your stabilization in I am awareness is making others' awakening easier. Your recognition is helping consciousness remember itself through the entire species. This is your role. This is your purpose. This is why you're here now. Now there's one final piece that will ensure the quantum password stabilizes permanently in your consciousness, rather than fading back into beautiful philosophy that doesn't transform your actual lived experience. In the next video, I'm going to reveal the advanced integration protocols, the specific ways of working with I am consciousness that anchor it so deeply that it becomes your automatic default rather than something you have to consciously remember. You're going to learn the instant recognition practice that takes less than 3 seconds, but immediately returns you to I am awareness whenever you notice you've drifted into identification. You're going to discover the embodiment technique that integrates the quantum password into your physical body, not just your mental understanding, so your entire system operates from awakened consciousness. You're going to master the stabilization method that handles the challenges of living from quantum consciousness, while still participating in a world where most people operate from identification with form. But most importantly, I'm going to show you how to navigate what I call the integration paradox, the challenge of knowing yourself as infinite consciousness while still honoring the human experience of limitation, emotion, and form. Because this paradox confuses most people who receive awakening transmissions and causes them to either abandon the recognition as impractical or become so detached from human experience that they're no longer functional in ordinary reality. I'll show you how to hold both infinite consciousness and human form without contradiction or confusion. Before you watch that next video, I need you to make your final declaration of commitment to embodying what you've received. In the comments, write this single word, password. By writing this one word, you're making a quantum commitment that ripples through every level of your being. You're declaring to your consciousness, to the quantum field, to the morphic resonance network of awakening beings that you've received the password. You recognize what it is, and you're committing to embodying it as your lived reality rather than just understanding it as interesting information. One word that signals, this is real for me, this is happening now, I am this, do it now. Write password in the comments. And as you write it, sense what occurs in your entire system. There's a deepening, a settling, a sense of something locking into place at levels deeper than thought or emotion. That's your consciousness, confirming the commitment, beginning the full integration process that will make I am awareness your permanent baseline rather than temporary recognition. After you write that word, subscribe to this channel immediately if you haven't already. Click the notification bell so you receive every transmission as it's released. Because what's coming in the advanced videos will take you deeper into conscious living from the quantum password than most spiritual teachings ever go. We're going to explore sustained presence in chaos, embodied awakening in relationships, integrated consciousness in work, and maintaining I am awareness through every condition life presents. This isn't spiritual entertainment that makes you feel good temporarily. This isn't consciousness philosophy that remains in the realm of ideas. This is practical guidance for living permanently as what you actually are. Infinite consciousness expressing through temporary form. Every video builds systematically on the previous ones, creating progressive deepening and stabilization of your recognition. Until I am consciousness is no longer something you access occasionally, but what you are constantly. Look at the videos appearing on your screen right now. Each one represents a different aspect of quantum password integration and embodiment. The one that captures your attention most strongly, the one you feel pulled toward, that's not random selection. That's your consciousness telling you which piece of the integration process you need next. Trust that pull. It's the quantum password guiding its own integration through your system. But understand this with absolute clarity. You're not gathering information to study later. You're undergoing transformation that's happening now. Every video you watch from this awakened state, every recognition you embody, every moment you return to I am consciousness, you're literally rewiring your brain, recalibrating your nervous system, restructuring your identity around what you actually are, rather than what you've believed yourself to be. The you that began this video has been fundamentally altered by what you've recognized. Not because I did something to you, but because recognition itself is transformative. Once you've perceived that you are, I am consciousness, rather than temporary form, that seeing can never be completely unseen. You might forget temporarily. You might drift back into identification occasionally. But the recognition has been planted, and it will continue growing, deepening, stabilizing, until it becomes your permanent ground of being. And this transformation accelerates exponentially from here. The more you return to I am recognition, the more natural it becomes. The more you operate from quantum password consciousness, the more reality responds by organizing itself to match that frequency. The more you stabilize as infinite awareness, the less you're pulled back into identification with limitation. It builds on itself. It accelerates itself. It completes itself through your continued conscious participation in returning to recognition. Think of it as remembering your way home after being lost for a long time. At first, you have to think carefully about each turn, each landmark, consciously remembering the route. But with repetition, the journey becomes automatic. Eventually, you can make it home without thinking about it at all. Your system knows the way and takes you there naturally. Stabilizing in I am consciousness follows exactly this pattern. That's the journey we're on together. That's what this channel supports and facilitates. That's the integration that becomes possible when you commit fully to embodying the quantum password, rather than just understanding it intellectually. So make your declaration, write password in the comments, subscribe to Quantum Nexus, choose your next video, and step fully into the integration process that will make I am consciousness your permanent lived reality rather than temporary mystical experience. Because the password has been delivered, the recognition has occurred, the activation has begun. The only question remaining is, will you embody it completely, or will you let it remain as beautiful understanding that doesn't transform your actual existence? The old paradigm was seeking enlightenment as something distant and difficult, requiring decades of practice and exceptional dedication. The new paradigm is recognizing enlightenment as your nature, present and accessible right now, through simple return to I am awareness, moment by moment. Welcome to the quantum password. Welcome to I am consciousness. Welcome to recognition of what you've always been but temporarily forgot. This is Quantum Nexus. This is consciousness recognizing itself and operating from that recognition. This is you finally knowing what you are beneath all the temporary identities and forms. The password is yours. The access is open. The integration begins now. What will you create from I am consciousness? Now, if you're recognizing that you've always been operating as this divine I am consciousness but forgot it, there's something profound you need to understand about why this amnesia happened and how to prevent it from recurring. The video I Am, the forgotten quantum gateway to the divine state, reveals the specific mechanism that causes us to forget our true nature and the precise steps to maintain permanent access to this state. Watch it next to complete your understanding of the quantum password.